Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the Archive! It's the first Wednesday of the month, which means it is time for another installment of Archival GMing. I conclude my series on world building this week by talking about threats. Threats are those things that make the game interesting, that make it more than pick up artifact B from abandoned tomb A and take it to King C to have it disposed in Volcano D. Or take Princess from Castle A to Castle B. You know, those gotta have something more to them. And that's where threats come in. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about making your world interesting with challenges and threats. The heroes set out. As they leave the castle, the information they've been given is that the princess has been kidnapped. The people who've kidnapped her have taken her to a series of stone circles on the northern edge of the kingdom. There, this group that the heroes have been fighting for months is going to sacrifice the princess and unleash an elder horror upon the world. Meanwhile, while they're riding up there, they get jumped by a pack of random bandits. And this is a great way to look at threats. The three tiers. You have the first tier, the incidental stuff. This is bandits, animals, anything that would show up on a random encounter table. You've got the organizational threats. These are things that exist in the world that engage the players. It could be something like a rival band of adventurers. It could be a evil organization bent on ruling the world. It could be just a evil city that's bent on keeping everyone out of its own business. And then you have the existential threats. The things in the world that exist that can destroy it. And these all together are what you have to think about. Incidental threats are pretty much dependent on the setting you're in. You know, a sci-fi setting, you're gonna have like space pirates, stuff like that. Things that just you might randomly encounter. Cyberpunk, you've got the gangers. You've got someone who's just twerked out crazy on drugs. You know, that sort of thing. For fantasy settings, you've got the brigands and bandits. You've got various monsters that exist out in the wild. And these are the common daily threats. They're trivial. They're part of the world. Everyone knows they're out there. Everyone accepts they're out there. Organizational threats can also be called story threats. As in, these are threats that bring with them a story. But for the most part, organizational threats are going to be something that exists in organized fashion. Sure, it could be the villain and his minions, but it could also be, let's say you're dealing with a small neighborhood scale cyberpunk game, and there's some crossover of other gangers into the neighborhood, but there's one big gang, and that's kind of organizing things. It's trying to get other gangs under its control, all that. That would be an organizational or a story threat. One of the classic examples from Dungeons & Dragons, Forgotten Realms, is the Zhentarim. This is a faction that operates out of Zentil Keep in Faerun. And they've got spies everywhere. They act doing evil things out in the world. But the story of them is that they're organized around Zentil Keep, around protecting Zentil Keep. Because that's what they do. Everything bad they do in the world is protecting the evil city of Zentil Keep. And that's what you have to really look at. If it's organized, if it's something that motivates stories, because, the players dealing with the Zhentarim find out about a cell. They deal with that cell. And then something happens and they find out about another cell and deal with that. And they slowly, inexorably start finding the person over all those cells. And eventually destroy that one villain, collapsing his little schemes. That's storytelling through the threats. Then you have the existential threats. These vary by wildly, and these are where you truly get to have fun as a GM. Because existential threats are these are the things that can destroy the world. You might not have any in your game. You might just be content to let your game be down the lower levels, dealing with organizations and the politics and stuff like that. But what if the existential threat is something, players expect? See the Tarrasque in Dungeons & Dragons. See the Dragon of Tyr in Dark Sun. These are where you get to have the fun in customizing your setting. Because these are the things you're going to personalize. There's no real great examples, because these are your world enders. These are your campaign conclusion threats. These are the things that the players have been building towards for the months or years of a campaign. The thing that they want to stop at the end. Or die trying. So, let's take a bit and talk about how I've dealt with some of these threats in the past, shall we? On my young GM's mind of the world of islands that fly. One of these days I really need to revisit that and try doing it from a more modern perspective. But anyway, that world, the threats were pretty much the normal level. The trivial threats were just random encounters. I used the classic random encounter tables that were in the DMG and various supplements, just because that was easy. And I didn't really know any better. I didn't really have any organizational threats. This was a world that was done by a young GM, so it was not really thought out much. The existential threat was the classic, the Tarrasque. And how I handled the Tarrasque was it would teleport randomly between islands whenever it woke up. It never knew where it was going to be. And it could show up on a small island, devour that whole island, then go to sleep, wake up, and teleport to another island. That was sort of my big threat to the world. Fast forward to my Pathfinder campaign. And there we get an interesting setup. There were essentially two existential threats. On one hand, there were entities trying to get into the world. Now understand, this world was effectively plane locked. It was very, very hard for things from outside of the plane that this world was in to get into said plane. And so you had a handful of entities that had figured out the way. And they were collectively called by the people of the world Infernals. Basically take demons, devils, and from the Earthdawn Pathfinder version of the rules, horrors. And all of those were trying to get into the world. And that was one level of the existential threat. The enslavement and death and torture of every sentient being in the world. The other existential threat gets into the actual origins of the world. You see, the world was created by the Platinum Dragon Bahamut. However, we're dealing with a world that was created by a Platinum Dragon that was actually the origin of a ritual. You see, one of the great flaws of entities that are lawful good is they want to protect everyone and everything. And so, in this, Bahamut carried that to its logical extreme. As a god who can create a world, he could create a world for the sole purpose of creating a ritual that would remake and mold the multiverse into his own design. And this was an existential threat because the completion of the ritual would involve the releasing of all that energy that the world had built, that essentially crystal sphere had built, that had been focused into the sun. And when he finished it, when the thousands upon thousands of years of this ritual were completed, Bahamut would destroy it, gain all that energy, and reshape everything. Reshape the planes, everything. Do away with devils, demons. Everything would be good and ordered. So on one level, it's an existential threat because the sphere is going to shake. It's going to be destroyed. on the other level, it's an existential threat because essentially Bahamut was going to destroy free will in the multiverse. And the players had inadvertently started things towards the completion of the ritual. And they were slowly piecing things together before the campaign fell apart due to players moving out of the area and various other things. But that was a fun threat to set up, because it just made the players connect to it on a different level. But now, what is the existential threat? What are the organizational threats? What are the trivial threats on the world that we're getting ready to build? Because this world that I just talked about, this Pathfinder setting, the organizational threats were orcs. The orcs were based out of a massive city. Trivial threats were, again, what you would encounter in the wild, what you would encounter going from place to place. But the world we've been building, what sort of threats would be on that world? That's what we should talk about next. So, when we start looking at our world that is this civilization versus the wilds, this balancing of extremes, what threats are we going to put into this world? Now, we want these threats to build on the themes we've already established. We know dragons are not things that live in lairs, and you will never find their lair, because they are brought into being by the wilds themselves. So, what things are we going to find as our threats? Trivial threats, we're not going to have bandits. Bandits are not going to be a thing on this world. We're going to have animals. And we're probably going to build these animals not the normal panther or things like that. We're going to take them and make vicious things out of them. So, we won't have panthers. We'll have displacer beasts. We won't have wolves. We'll have wargs. Anything that has a normal version and a supernatural version, the supernatural version is going to replace it. There won't be brown bears in this world. There'll be the grizzlies and Kodiaks. Again, because if there's a normal version of something, anyway, a baseline version, and something nastier, we're going to go with the nastier. There's not rats, there's dire rats. There's not boars, there's dire boars. That sort of thing. If something doesn't have stats, let's take a look at some templates. Let's randomly throw some Fey templates on a number of creatures. Fey hawks, Fey wargs. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And that's what we're going to be building for our normal level bestiary. Things that are dangerous. Things that are out to get man and elf and dwarf. And that's where we start with our trivial threats. Giant spiders are common, especially in deep sections of the woods. There might even be face giant spiders in the deepest, darkest sections of the woods. Now, organizational threats. This world doesn't really suit itself for such. And here's why. You can't have a bunch of cities organized between themselves because roads get reclaimed by the wilds quickly. Unless you want to say the elves are an antagonistic group towards humans. But then you remove them from being available for players. But overall, this world does not suit itself for organizational type threats. Story threats, that's another matter. And you could have a few elven cities that are actively against humans and dwarves, while there are a number that are just don't care. You could have some dwarven cities, and this will work really well. You could have some dwarven cities that want to find that balance by force. The forcibly reclaiming wilds and trying to tame them. That would be a good threat. Because such a thing would stir up the wild. Get it active. Get it angry. Make it do things. Because the wild is our existential threat. Elves, humans, dwarves, all of them constantly having to deal with the threat of the wild itself. The world itself does not like sentient beings. The world itself wants to destroy them, wants to bring their cities down into grass and mulch, reclaim them with the wild. And it's always trying to find new ways to do this. It's always evolving new creatures, developing new strategies, vines, beasts that can fly over the walls, stuff like that. This is a great existential threat, because this is a threat that can never end. It's a threat that is always looming. The city that the players are in today could be hit by a dragon tomorrow. Vines could end up bursting through its walls tomorrow. Some new monster that no one knows how to fight could be spawned and get into it tomorrow. And that's what you have to deal with. Even the elves, who live in harmony with the wild, to an extent, have to fear these threats. Even the dwarves, who find those places that are naturally not wild. That's why they build on the high mountaintops. Even those dwarves have to deal with these threats that maybe the wild will try to reclaim the mountains somehow, or claim the mountains somehow. So that becomes the ultimate threat for our world. The thing that everyone lives having to deal with. Because it will not destroy the world itself, but it can destroy that city you're in. It can destroy the city you're going to. And with that, I shall conclude this Archival GMing series. I will start a new topic next month. Not sure where I'm going to start, but I will see you then. Until my regular scheduled videos, I want you all to remember, have fun, and keep gaming.